Hello, everyone. Welcome to Right of Resistance. I'm Kuros Charney. My guest today is Dr. Rupa Marya. She is a physician, activist, writer, composer, artist, and soil lover. She is co-author with Raj Patel of the book Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice, which argues that capitalism, colonialism, and systemic racism literally make us sick. As a founder of the Do No Harm Coalition and Deep Medicine Circle, she has worked to reimagine healthcare through decolonial and community-centered frameworks. She was named one of the top 20 most influential women in biomedicine by Nature magazine. She is also the lead singer of the band Rupa and the April Fishes, which she describes as making liberation music. On top of all that, she has been one of the most outspoken doctors in the US, calling attention to what's happening in Gaza's hospitals. And she recently faced retaliation and firing from UCSF for that advocacy. Rupa Marya, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. What an intro. My goodness.
Well, it's great to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us. So if we could just talk first off about what happened at UCSF, if you could just tell us, whatever you want to tell us. I mean, in terms of like how it got started, what was the climate there, post October 2023, and sort of how everything evolved, over the past.
Yeah. Well, I was working there for about 23 years. I came there for my medical residency and ended up staying there on an amazing career, doing half of my time in the hospital as a hospital medicine physician, teaching medical students and residents how to be taking care of acutely ill people in the hospital, and then half of the year touring around the world with my band, the April Fishes. And it was through that going back and forth between the bedside and the touring where I started to see and notice dynamics in society that were leading people to be either healthy or unhealthy. And that inquiry over years made the foundation of our book that we wrote, Inflamed, which really looks at the structures of colonial capitalism as the real determinants of whether people are healthy or not healthy, whether people have power to, take care of their circumstances or not. And so before October 2023, what I noticed as a doctor is that the more I would speak up to advocate for Black patients in particular at UCSF, I started getting harassed by leadership. I mean, I literally was called into the office every time I strongly advocated for a Black patient to get the standard of care. And the words that were used at that time were calling me unprofessional, calling me a bully, saying there was a problem with my communication. Invariably, if I would strongly advocate, like, why is this person not getting dialysis? Why are they being sent to hospice? Why is this person not getting referred to for public housing when they've come in 5 times this month, missing their dialysis because they don't have housing? Why is this? I would just start asking these questions. And around this time, as I was asking these questions, the percentage of the Black population was slowly being pushed out further and further from San Francisco as the tech elite were taking over San Francisco again in the early aughts, as the evictions were increasing, as rents were increasing in San Francisco, as the policing in San Francisco was becoming increasingly aggressive with Black and brown people being shot in the street, often, within just seconds or minutes of encounter, and often called, the police were being called by people who were new to our communities, who had just moved in. They were part of the tech overlords who had taken over the Bay Area once again. And so when I started describing the dynamics of structural harm that we were seeing that were causing poor health outcomes in medicine, I was starting getting pushback, whether it was directly about a patient or about systems. And that harassment was ongoing for years and really came to a head when I said stop bombing hospitals in November of 2023. That's when death threats, rape threats coming to the most horrific racist things I've ever seen coming to my inbox at work, me calling for help to the leadership at UCSF and them just ignoring me for a week. And that was very different from what happened during COVID, before the run up to the last election, where I was getting death threats and, threats because of my scholarship, looking at colonialism, looking at capitalism and health, especially how COVID laid all that bare. And so that difference made me kind of wonder, why were they so proactively helpful at that time in COVID? And now they're just ignoring me. And the first I heard from UCSF leadership in November 2023 is that I was being put under investigation for my speech on social media. So that was bizarre to me. Like, why would you investigate me for saying stop bombing hospitals? Why would you investigate me for sharing the testimony of Dr. Abu Sitta, who I was in touch with for the first 43 days of the genocide? And he, a British Palestinian surgeon, was in the operating rooms of the Al-Ahli Hospital, of the Baptist Hospital, as these places were being bombed. And so as I was sharing this with my medical colleagues at UCSF, the response I was getting was, "It's complicated, shut up, don't say those things. You're going to hurt people's feelings," I was told. I'm like, I can tell you what's hurting is the patients and the doctors in these situations. So it was shocking to me to see that even before that November stop bombing hospitals comment, I was being harassed by people like Emily Silverman, who is a narrative medicine doctor at UCSF, who was emailing me to ask me about, I see that you're mentioning that Israel is a settler colonial state, and did you know that I just learned that Jews are indigenous to this area, and therefore, how could it be settler colonialism if people are indigenous? And I thought that was a very bizarre line of questioning. She's sort of parroting a lot of the same talking
Sure.
points that were
Sure.
coming out of Israel.
Yeah.
And now that we're seeing sort of like a web of communication being disseminated through places like the ADL.
Yeah.
So there are these talking points like, oh, well, how could it be, settler colonialism if people are indigenous? And I had to say, well, the Pomo and the Miwok and the Ohlone all lived in this area together called the Bay Area now. And if the Miwok came and slaughtered all the Ohlone people and then took over their hunting grounds and established their own rule there, that too would be settler colonialism. That would too, it's not about your identity that somehow saves you. It's your practice. And so she was one of the first people who started emailing me and saying, you're making the world unsafe for Jews by saying that Israel bombed this hospital. And I said, well, Israel claimed to bomb the hospital. I'm in touch with the doctors who said the Israeli military called them and said, we're going to bomb the hospital in 2 days. And then they bombed the hospital. So why would I not believe that Israel bombed the hospital? Now that Israel is, being confronted with the outrage of the world when that first hospital was bombed, then it became, oh no, maybe it's a jihadi rocket, maybe it's a this, maybe it was Hamas, maybe it was this. So then there became this cloud of confusion. And people were like, oh, it's so complicated, I can't take a stand. And that's part of what's been happening. This sort of narrative confusion is very purposeful. While as colleagues with doctors in Gaza, it was very clear what was happening. Children's bodies were being blown up in the courtyard of a hospital. And so that to me she was the first one. Then it was the Vice Chancellor, Catherine Lucy, calling me on the phone on a Saturday. Oh, I read your post on Twitter and I thought it was very interesting and I just wanted to talk about it. Why is the Vice Chancellor calling me to talk about my social media posts on a Saturday? So there was just this constant harassment and haranguing that led to this, you're under investigation, which then led to UCSF making a public defamatory statement about me. They didn't name me, but I came out in January and started asking questions about Zionism in medicine. So every other system of supremacism leads to poor health outcomes for different groups of people. White supremacy, you've got, Black babies survive less when they have a non-Black doctor. That means that Black babies are being neglected by doctors who are not Black. That is how racism shows up in medicine in an interpersonal way, not just a structural way, but interpersonally. And so I asked the question, Zionism is a racist ideology that creates a sense of Jewish supremacism a reality of Jewish supremacism on a land that's pluralistic, a land with many peoples. And so, how does that form of Jewish supremacism impact healthcare here when we're being silenced? Like when people are being silenced for saying, don't bomb hospitals, or harassed, or refusing to speak up. So I asked this question online, and I got tagged by California State Senator Scott Wiener. And Scott Wiener tagged UCSF and said, "Look, your doctor's is a Jew hater," basically, which is a horrific thing to say about me, as I've been committed to anti-racism my whole life and career. And so he tags UCSF, and in this flurry online, I then see Canary Mission tagged. I then end up on the Canary Mission, which is now the site that the Trump administration is using as a hit site for all the students that they want to deport, or academics they want to get fired. And then UCSF, a few days later, comes out with this post that they write and said, there's a anti-Semitic, horrible statement being made that's racist and intellectually bankrupt. And it was targeted at me. The internet knew it was me. Everyone knew it was me. And they made this public statement. And so that to me was very interesting, that Scott Wiener, who is a very pro real estate development politician in San Francisco, who's been to Israel several times during the genocide, who has been working to dismantle our ethnic studies program in California. He's right now advancing AB 715 to try to control what we say as professors. So why is he targeting me as a public university professor? And that's when I started to learn about the ties between the Diller family, which is UCSF's largest donor, who funds Scott Wiener's campaign, offers him through a chain of California landlords initiatives and organizations that they're part of. He gets money from them. They are Jackie Safier, who's the head of the Diller Foundation, sits on the board of UCSF. There are hospitals named after the Diller family, and they're the largest donor to the UC system. And so I started asking, okay, what does this politician, this donor, and my university administration have? What are they doing together that would lead to this really bizarre statement? So the woman who used to be in charge of managing abuse on campus, Denise Caramagno, took UCSF's weird statement, retweeted it, and said, "I can't believe that a faculty member is being harassed by UCSF for speaking about her area of expertise. My area of expertise is looking at racism and structures of power and how they impact medicine, and Zionism as a ideology of taking the land of other people and instituting a new nation where you deny the rights of indigenous people to food, water, medicine, life, housing." And so that she wrote that, and she said, I can't believe this is happening. Well, a few months later, Emily Silverman is contacting everyone in the leadership at UCSF. An email got leaked to a whole group of us that showed her saying, hey, here's Denise Caramagno. She's not safe to take care of Jewish people. Look, she's supporting Dr. Rupa's vile racism, my vile racism. And so Denise Caramagno gets fired. Then I get lined up. So then they keep me under the investigation. I have more requests for investigations, more interviews. They're putting me through these procedures. Then I get named in a congressional letter by this Republican congressional group that's trying to evaluate anti-Semitism on campus. UCSF, what are you going to do about this anti-Semitism? Meanwhile, every hospital in Gaza is bombed. Meanwhile, Dr. Abu Safia is taken prisoner, the head of the Kamal Adwan Hospital, pediatrician. He's still being tortured by Israel. There are thousands of hostages who've been taken from Palestine, hundreds of healthcare workers. So as they're focusing on me and my, quote, anti-Semitism for speaking out against the genocide, they want all of us silenced. And Kuros, this isn't just happening this is not just happening at UCSF. In the genocide, I was talking to the head of health equity at the AMA. Hey, you need to say something. I was on a Lancet Commission for Anti-Racism and Solidarity in Medicine. I kept bringing up Gaza. We need to make a statement. Everyone's like, we're here for Black health. Well, stop distracting us. You're making this a distraction, they said, right? So every place I tried to turn to get the institutions of medicine to acknowledge that our colleagues were being murdered, they were being raped to death, that children were being murdered in the hospital, that patients were being burned alive in hospital beds. This was happening. That at no point would these institutions of medicine turn and address and take on, because all of them were beholden to a class of people who were deeply invested in the genocide continuing, in Israel accomplishing its goals, which we now know are complete ethnic cleansing of Gaza, Palestine. And so that led to me in the summer, August, September, students who were coming back to school, the medical students started talking about how uncomfortable they were that there was someone there who was from Israel, who said they were from Israel. And the students said it, several students, several different times said, there's someone here who just came from Israel who's in our class. And like, what do we do? And at this point, the woman who was supposed to handle this has been fired. The entire Office for Harassment and Discrimination has been co-opted. All the complaints I filed, there was a doctor of Romy Canal who made a statement like, oh, we don't want us to have a ceasefire because then Hamas will get the upper hand and then they'll just take more hostages in the future. And this was on an anti-racism task force forum I was brought into to hear, okay, did a doctor really just argue for no ceasefire? What doctor have you ever heard argue to keep killing going as like to justify the killing of anybody? I've never heard that before. It was shocking. So I logged that as, hey, here's some anti-Arab racism right here. Here's some anti-Palestinian racism. No, that's not, we've evaluated it. This was just a difference of opinion. So every complaint I put forward was denied. And all these complaints about me, like thousands of complaints for me saying, hey, there's a genocide. Hey, look, here are the facts. This is a medical emergency. We as a medical community must stand up. So then when I tweeted about that, it was all on my social media. They had like so many screenshots of my social media. They're very upset about my social media. I asked, hey, med school students are afraid. There's someone here from Israel. The university brought this. What is our obligation as a profession? Do we just bring these people, like, did this person engage in war crimes? Usually people come to medical school right after they serve in the IDF if they're coming from Israel, right after serving in the Israeli military. So I asked that question online, and again, Scott Wiener tags me, tags UCSF. Hey, look, she's targeting and harassing a student, an Israeli medical student. We now know in the 462-page report that was used to fire me, that was prepared by the Paul Weiss law firm, the same law firm that gave Trump $40 million of free medical, legal advice, legal service. We now know in that on page 451, there's a statement that there is no first-year medical student from Israel. So who was that person making the medical students uncomfortable? Who announced that they were from Israel? We don't know. And so that's just an interesting thing. So I was fired for harassing someone who may or may not exist. And that's something that we're going to see when we get discovery. And what we do know is that a California state senator is getting involved in trying to cull professors with whom he has political disagreements. Scott Wiener. So we need to start looking at how to recall Scott Wiener in San Francisco. He's also trying to control what we teach. And I will share kudos. I am the only physician author at UCSF. The book that I wrote, Inflamed, was reviewed by The Lancet, which is one of the most prestigious journals in my profession, is taught in medical schools around the world. And I'm the only one who's written a book that's been translated into 7 languages at my university who wasn't given a grand rounds to speak about her work. And I asked specifically Bob Wachter, the head of medicine, who's a hardcore Zionist, hey, how do I get a grand rounds to speak about my work? We don't want to share that here. So my book did not talk about Israel and Palestine directly, but it talked about these exact dynamics of oppression, violence, domination, subjugation, genocide, ecocide. Everything we're seeing playing out in Palestine was refined by the Nazis, who were inspired by the United States and how they treated indigenous people in the US. So this is like the legacy, ongoing legacy of violent colonialism. So I was fired on May 20th without a hearing in front of the Academic Senate, which I was due. And now I'm suing the university. They just received they just were served in the state courts for civil rights and in the federal courts for free speech. And this is really important because if doctors can't speak up for patients, doesn't matter who they are, we will never have health equity for anybody. So I care, and I could have written 3 more books about health equity, but I knew what I would show through this lawsuit is going to demonstrate what I mean more than anything, that this is a structural issue, that violent racists, when they're in charge of structures, will always lead to violent racism, that we need structures that can be sound and built through a decolonial lens and built with the intention of serving the health of all people. So you can never put that in the hands of people who believe in any sort of supremacist racist ideology, any form of ethno-nationalism, and say, yeah, we're going to get a good outcome this time. No, we're not. We're not going to until we can take those structures and reimagine them.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
sorry, that was a lot.
No, I mean, it is there is a lot there for sure. And this played out over, I mean, what, about a year and a half, over a year and a half, right? Almost. I wonder, the outcome, as far as your job, sounds like it was, sort of, inevitable or predetermined. But did you observe any change in the climate over that period of time because of what was coming out of Gaza? And I mean, not obviously not from the administration, but just in terms, from the student body, from your colleagues, from any level of support that you got. I mean, I think you did mention on another show that some of your colleagues were being asked to falsify reports about your medicine practice. Is that that
there
true?
was so when I was first suspended in September of 2024, UCSF tried to attack my medical license and tried to frame me as unsafe for patients, like unsafe. Then I learned from an attending that they were approached and asked to write an incident report about my care of a patient who I got out of pain after 10 months of being in severe cancer pain. In 4 days, I got her out of pain. And they were like, well, this just seems like a very irregular treatment protocol. And they were like, yeah, and it worked. Like, yeah, she could do it because she's been doing this for 23 years. I mean, it was a junior attending. Oh, do you think that we should write an incident report about this? And they're like, why would we do that? So I've never had an incident report. I have a completely pristine record of taking really good care of people. So that was just, wow, the lengths that they're going to go to try to damage my career. And so then not only did they fire me, Kuros, but they put in a 10-year censure letter. So in my file, I've been censured for 10 years, which means I can't get a job in the University of California as a professor of medicine for the rest of my career. Which, it's like they really, and then they tried to prevent me from coming out to Trinity College Dublin, where I've gotten an appointment now, where I'm doing work on farming and, decolonizing land, food, and medicine. That's what I do.
How did they try to prevent you?
They tried to prevent me from, I was offered a visiting professorship to come and give a lecture. And they're like, it is inappropriate for her to come and give a lecture. And I'm like, y'all can fuck off because I asked you to give a lecture about my book. I asked you to give a lecture about the work I'm doing with indigenous communities on moving land back and getting food, health and farming together. I've asked to present this many times and you said no. So I'm going to go present it where they want me to present it. So that's, those kinds of dynamics where they'd send their lawyers after me. I should mention, Kuros, that I was also already being harassed in February of 2023 by Alan Dershowitz and the university because I was going to give a talk. And I gave a talk for the first health equity grand rounds, national health equity grand rounds at the AMA, the American Medical Association. And they knew I was going to talk about Howard Maybach. And Howard Maybach is, now I know, a Zionist professor at UCSF who used to be the chair of dermatology. And when he was in the 60s and 70s, he was injecting patients who were imprisoned in San Quentin and the California Medical Facility, Black and brown people, with toxic chemicals paid for by Dow Chemical and other chemical companies to determine their safety profiles. So organophosphate pesticides, injecting 2,600 people and exposing 2,600 people to poison. And these experiments were very much like Nazi experiments that were done on Jewish people in specific concentration camps. And they would keep a record of how their bodies responded to these poisons. It's a horrific thing to do. He did these experiments without informed consent. While he was a professor at UCSF, just a few years after the Nuremberg trials, which established the forms of informed consent needed for medical experimentation on humans so that people did not recreate Nazi experiments. So when I started speaking, this came out to light around the time of George Floyd, and I wrote about it in my book. And UCSF came out just before this grand rounds and said, "Oh, we're so sorry that this happened, and we're going to do an oral history project." I'm like, "That's not how you handle it. You've got to find those 2,600 people and contact their families and see what happened to those people, and you got to offer them some sort of repair. You can't just say, "Oh, whoops, we this is just part of our dark history," because Howard Maybach is still employed. So this doctor who injected 2,600 people with poison is still employed at UCSF, even though he's 90-something years old. He's represented by Alan Dershowitz. So Alan Dershowitz wrote a letter to UCSF. UCSF's, what's her name? Catherine Lucy, who called me up to say, like, "Hey, I'm so interested about your social media post." She called me in February of 2023 before my Grand Rounds appearance to let me know that I had been named in a letter by Alan Dershowitz. So again, harassing. And I'm like, what are you trying to tell me? They're like, "Oh, he doesn't want you to speak at this thing." I'm like, okay, do I care? Right? So even then, the university was trying to harass me and intimidate me into silence. So now I am a doctor who stood against the genocide. I've been fired. I've been censured. I have been dragged in the press. UCSF leaked the notice of my suspension to Nanette Asimov at the San Francisco Chronicle. That's illegal in California Labor Code to do that. But they did that, and we'll find out who did that in our lawsuit. Now Trump administration has actually removed the protection of journalists, so now they have to give up their sources. So it'll be interesting to hear, like, who's leaking that to Nanette Asimov? Why does she know about my suspension before my mother does, before I've even had a chance to call my own family? And so it was put in the press in that way. And this is part of the Project Esther dynamic we're seeing, where they have their minions in the press. So they churn out all this press, then they can write the Wikipedia article that will live forever as, like, look at this Jew hater. Then they have their stop anti-Semitisms and their, online harassment groups, their Canary Missions. Then they have their connections to the politicians. Then the politicians will put sort of pressure on the administration. Then the administration can blame the politicians that we don't get our funding if we don't get rid of you. And so it becomes this web of dynamics to throw out professors like me and to remake the American Academy. And that's what's happening with Maura Finkelstein, with myself, with Dr. Sankeel, like all of these professors who are, most of them are femme or women, almost all of them are people of color. And so that is, this should be an alarm to everyone, not just from the health side, but from our education.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And one of the interesting things that you touched upon there is like how these different bodies and governments learn from each other, right? It's like, things that the Nazis didn't end with the Nazis, you know what I mean? And obviously things that are done in Latin America to, crush activist movements or something, they come back to the United States. Or of course, all of the horrible technology that is being employed to cause death and destruction in Gaza and in Palestine is coming back here to police our protests, or do any number of other things. I wondering if we could just talk a little bit more about your book, and kind of just in more general terms about how these how things like capitalism, colonialism, really do affect our health and are, in some ways, like literally killing us. Since you didn't get to do your grand rounds at UCSF, maybe you can do your grand rounds, right here now in the next, 10 minutes or something, before we have to go. Because I think, and, for anyone who wants to delve more into the specifics of Zionism, you can watch my first episode with Maura Finkelstein. We talk in detail about that. But, your social media thread, of course, was talking specifically about Zionism in medicine, right, and how it impacts us. And so that is one example of the various structures. But if you want to talk a little bit more in general, maybe about capitalism in particular, I think that's something obviously is very relevant to American society, and colonialism, whatever else you think would be relevant.
Yeah. Well, so what the thesis of the book is that our bodies, our societies, and our planet are all inflamed because of the same processes, the same structures, and those are structures that create damage or the threat of damage. And in our bodies, the immune response, the inflammatory response, is a part of the immune system, and it's the immune system's work to repair damage. It's actually a healing response. And so when you have a wound, if you have damage in your body, the inflammatory response is activated, and it brings out a whole host of like biochemical and cellular molecular mediators to heal the wound. And when the wound is healed, that response goes quiet. But when the damage keeps coming and the threat of damage keeps coming and accumulates, then the inflammatory response doesn't turn off. And it ends up becoming something that creates collateral damage in the body, more damage. And that damage we see is chronic inflammation. And so we see our cells, literally our cells, aged and changed through these damage signals that are ongoing, whether it's the damage of being forced to work the night shift, the damage of being evicted from your home, the stress of not being able to pay your mortgage. Debt itself is an independent driver of inflammation in the body, whether it's the damage of environmental pollutants, the microplastics you're breathing, the pesticides that are on your food or in your cereal. These kinds of things damage the body in very specific ways. And when you add them together, we call that the exposome, all your toxic, your all the sum of your exposures. Even to like the stories you're told as a child. Are the police there to help you, or are the police there to kill you? And you have to be careful. Watch what you say. Watch how you act. Those things add up to a very pro-inflammatory state. And so when you look at the diseases that I take care of as a doctor in a colonized or capitalist society, most of them, almost all of them, are chronic inflammatory diseases. So from heart disease to cancer to diabetes to Alzheimer's to suicide, depression, anxiety, all of these diseases have chronic inflammation as a part of their pathology. And so we can keep adding, you here's some insulin for this, and here's a treatment for this cancer and that. But until we stop the damage, we're not going to actually change the rising rates of diabetes. Why is it that 35-year-olds are now dying of colon cancer? The damage signals in our gut, the damage to our gut microbiology, the damage to the ecosystems that support that gut microbiology. Those things are all interrelated. So if we want health, We will know we are healthy when we are not inflamed. And if we want health, we have to start working upstream in these structures. So that's what we call deep medicine. Deep medicine is structural changes for health. Understanding that the problem is in the structures, and the structures generated by capitalism and colonial capitalism specifically are the most damaging in the history of humankind. We have never seen anything like it. Where now we can't live on the planet in the same way. Because of the fires now down in Portugal and Spain, fires in California, the polar ice caps melting, the sea levels rising. So there's always been a shift in climate on this planet. But what's happened in the last 150 years, 200 years, with the advent of like the movement of petroleum and the families like the Rockefellers going in to move that into every aspect of our lives, to vertically integrate petroleum products from your household goods to your medicines, to your car, to how you get around, to what you eat. All of these things are now completely dependent on a fossil fuel-based economy, a fossil fuel-based world. And so those are structures. That's what's exciting, is that they were engineered, which means that they can be re-engineered, which means they can be redesigned. And that's what we look at in our book, as how we understand the anatomy of injustice that has been created through colonial capitalism, and start designing something that brings about health for not just humans, health for the whole system. Because when the whole system is healthy, we will all be healthy. That's how it works. That's the beauty of it. And so, there's 1,500 peer-reviewed citations in the back. And I think that's probably what made it so dangerous, because it's hard to argue with the science that we look at. I do look forward to arguing about the science, because, we've really looked exhaustively. And what's so beautiful about working with Raj is he's such a big thinker in terms of economics and ecology, political ecology, that to bring our minds together, this was a book that couldn't have been written by any one of us. It was really bringing our minds together with the several dozens of people that we interviewed and discussed and read and debated for a couple of years. So we just hope that book can be of service to people, so that we can identify clearly what's going on, and we can postulate the solutions more holistically.
Yeah. So, okay, well, in our last few minutes here, other than going out and buying the book and reading the book, what can we do as individuals or in organizing with others, to take practical steps? You think
When I look at
term.
the Gaza is being starved to death. The situation is so urgent there, and then we need to be starting to organize for a general strike. We need a general strike. That's what we need. We need healthcare workers to stop being so goddamn scared. I'll do my activism outside the hospital. The hospitals that you're working at are the entities that are supporting this genocide. Go to the hospitals and make noise. If people are like, this feels uncomfortable, find out why. It's like having the KKK as your hospital board. Is that going to be acceptable? No. Why is this acceptable? Why can't we talk about anti-Palestinian racism? We need an overwhelming avalanche of solidarity. So when you ask for what are the response of my colleagues, it's been cowardice. Honestly, it's been cowardice and pushing out any radical thought. Like, we're going to have a bake sale against genocide. Literally, that's what they're doing in medicine. Bake sales against genocide. Petitions to stop a genocide. We cannot continue to petition when our colleagues are being raped to death. We must move forward more comprehensive strategies that take on the deeply racist ideologies that are driving this genocide from within medicine. Because if you have people who are that racist to let something like this happen, how are they making funding allocations in your hospital? How are they denying the healthcare of other kinds of people in your community? So why is it that Black mothers are dying at 12 times the rate of white mothers in the US? It's because the people making those choices and funding allocations are the same people who are saying, oh, no, it's not a genocide. Oh, it's complicated. Oh, we're not going to talk about it. Oh, we're not going to make a stand about this. No, 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 no. We don't want to offend anyone. Israel has a right to defend itself. Starving children is not a right to defend. No one has a right to starve children or shoot them in the head. No one has a right to rape doctors to death. No one has a right to silence doctors as we stand up in solidarity with our colleagues around the world, no matter who they are. No one has a right to do that. And when patients realize that it's their doctors in their hospitals that are driving this, they can start to get a little bit more critical in thinking through, why do we not get the healthcare we deserve here in the United States? It's also important to realize that our taxpayer dollars in the US go to paying universal healthcare in Israel. Our taxpayer dollars in the US support Israeli people getting universal healthcare. This is while the Trump administration just cut food in medicine and the Congress, food and medicine at the tune of $1 trillion to the most needy people in the United States. So this is class war. This is not going to go away with a midterm election. The doctors and nurses who are doing their activism on the side, not confronting their unions, not confronting their hospital administration, they are part of the problem. They are what we call like a counter-revolutionary force. They need to be addressed directly. So this is a critical time. And I've been shocked by the cowardice of my colleagues. I've been honestly disgusted by it. I would rather be fired and feel in principle than continue to be on the dole of an institution that is silencing doctors who stand against genocide. So my question to my colleagues is, why are you still there? Like, why is that acceptable to you? And how can we allow you to tap into your disgust and live the values we say we have for health for all people? If we really have those values, that's going to require something being sacrificed on that altar. What are you willing to sacrifice? So general strike, withhold labor, billing strikes, anything we can do to pressure hospital administration to take this seriously, that when there's a genocide and our community is impacted, we all need to stand up together, period. So that's what I would say. And to understand that when we don't, and when we silence, when medical institutions are silencing people standing up against genocide, they are becoming enablers of that genocide. And that is the report we submitted to the UN that got published in June. And I can share that link with you and your listeners. But it's important for people to understand what's going on because it has ramifications for your healthcare too.
Sure. I know you have to go. And as solidarity is so important, and obviously just sort of cowering isn't really an answer because that's not going to make you safe anyway. I mean, it's funny you mentioned bake sales because the EU anti-Semitism czar said that bake sales for Gaza could contribute to anti-Semitism. So
right,
even
the bake sales aren't safe.
Yes, even the cookies. Okay. Well, anyway, I know you have a heart out, so thank you so much for joining us. This was great. This was really informative. Certainly, maybe we can have you back on in the future to talk more as about any and everything. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to Right of Resistance. Please join us next time for more talk about propaganda, injustice, and ways to resist. Thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and consider supporting the show on Patreon. Right of Resistance is an independent podcast. We don't have corporate sponsors or media backers. We rely on listeners like you. So if you want to help us grow, visit patreon.com/rightofresistance to become a member for as little as $3 a month. Every contribution makes a difference.